Mr. Secretary. I personally object to including mining as part of the job generation program of the government. In fact, this mining, large-scale mining, may even be counterproductive to your job generation program because statistics would show that large-scale mining displaces small-scale mining workers. We have records to show this in the Cordilleras, in the Benguet area. There have been mining entities in the past, Mr. Chairman, that used to have thousands of mining workers when mining was done small-scale. But when it was converted into a large-scale mining entity from several thousand, this was reduced to maybe about 200 to 300. I'm speaking of the Itogon mining area. And I think this is true in all instances. So if we include mining here, and if you look at the figure, the measly figure of 26,000, against a revenue projected over a 10-year period, if I recall the figure given by the Bureau of Mines, I forget the name now, about $3.5 billion revenue, but hiring only about 26,000. And the $3.5 billion, Mr. Chairman, would not go to the mining people, but would go to the mining entrepreneurs, and only a small part of that would be salaries and wages. I don't know what is the position of the Secretary here, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Your Honor. Actually, previous to this, mas malaki po talaga yung dating mga working population natin sa mining industry. But many of these were actually minors na nirescue po natin to the sagip parang manggagawa.
Minors.
Yes, totoo yan. Mga minors who are miners, no? Especially in the mountains.
So they're even into child abuse, Mr. Chairman.
Child labor ho
That is categorized as child abuse.
Child labor ho actually under the ILO classification. Nagkaroon po tayo ng programa dito, no, katulong ng ILO to rescue them and provide alternative employment to the families, no, so that the children will go to school. And this is an ongoing program of the department for as long as I can remember, maybe 7 or 8 years now, Your Honor. So itong nakikita natin ito, ito na lang ho yung net na nasa working age na talagang nagtatrabaho or nakapagtrabaho sa mining sector natin. Tayo konti-konti na lang.
Thank you. Now let me go to one point that I discussed in another setting. And I think this department is probably the most relevant. And I'm talking, Mr. Chairman, of how we should address the global employment situation. I have been an exponent of this. In fact, if I had my way, I would, it's going to be very difficult, I would even double or even triple the budget of TESDA because of its capability to generate instant employment, both domestic and foreign. And because of this, it is my view, Mr. Chairman, that today the Department of Labor can be considered probably the most strategic department if we look at strengthening the Philippine economy on a long-term and even a short-term basis. If we look at the potentials in other sectors would pale in comparison. If we compare this, for example, with energy, with transportation and communications, the department, properly supported and properly strategized, can probably become one of the most powerful entities, not only in the Philippines but throughout the world, because world labor is power. And right now, the Philippines can be considered a world power. As far as labor is concerned, we have practically colonized a lot of countries already.
Less than 200 countries.
More than 199.
Yes.
And, you know, power shifts the more Filipinos there are, the more dependent that country becomes. Like I heard the mayor of New York City saying, and Mr. Bloomberg saying, that right now, if even the illegal immigrants in New York are removed, the economy of New York would collapse. That is how dependent they are on foreign labor. Saudi Arabia's economy would collapse if all of a sudden Filipinos would pull out. Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, Korea would collapse if the Filipinos would all of a sudden be pulled out. Of course, there's no way that they can do this. They are so locked already on Philippine labor that there is no way. I remember, Mr. Chairman, I had the opportunity when I was in the cabinet of witnessing even no less than Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong, when he was the Prime Minister of Singapore, telling the President in an ASEAN summit, not ASEAN but Asian summit, that Singapore is fully dependent on Philippine labor, that their productivity is going to diminish if not for Philippine labor, irrespective of the level. Just like us, we can imagine ourselves working without the unskilled and semi-skilled workers supporting us. Mr. Chairman, I would like to quote again, this is one of the most exciting books I've read lately by George Friedman. This is the other Friedman. Thomas Friedman is the other Friedman, the author of The World is Flat, and the author of Hot, Crowded, and Flat. But George Friedman is the founder of Strafor, and he wrote an international bestseller. This is published just this year, Mr. Chairman. The Next 100 Years by George Friedman. Let me quote his observation. And I think this is something that we should be very conscious of, that we should make this part of strategizing what I consider one of the most important assets that we have, and this is human capital. Your home base, Mr. Secretary, human capital. And may I quote, but underlying all of this, the single most important fact is talking about what's going to happen in the next several years. But underlying all of this will be the single most important fact of the 21st century, the end of the population explosion. By 2050, advanced industrial countries will be losing population at a dramatic rate. In fact, they're now losing population. Western Europe, Germany, Japan, some Korean villages are starting to die because of a population decline. By 2100, even the most underdeveloped countries will have reached birth rates that will stabilize their population. We're talking of countries like the Philippines. But this is what I consider very exciting for us. Quite simply, in the first half of the century, and we're now in the first half of this century, the population bust will create a major labor shortage in advanced industrialized countries. Today, developed countries see the problem as keeping immigrants out. Later, in the first half of the 21st century, the problem will be persuading them to come. Persuading them to come. Countries will go so far as to pay people to move there. They will include the United States, which will be competing for increasingly scarce immigrants. In fact, they will be practically begging for immigrants. This is already happening. New Zealand, to a certain extent, Australia, Canada, Germany is facing a very critical population situation, notwithstanding their Turkish problem. In fact, some people are saying that in about 20-25 years, the Turks coming from Turkey may constitute about 30% of their population. By in about 20 years from now, the non-whites are going to overtake in about in percentage population, the population in the United States. So this is an opportunity that we have. I've always been saying that we cannot produce a population overnight, but we can educate a population overnight.